before then. But all right, so my name is Crypt0s. I'm going to present to you guys some research I did on hacking into 802.15.4 networks. But first, a little bit about myself. There's my Twitter handle. There's my email. There's my GitHub. You're probably going to want to check out at least one of those things by the end of the talk. I'm into race cars and exploits. I do actually just got back from doing 24 hours of lemons last week in Kershaw. And if you know anything about that, you race shitty cars fast. And I work for Department 13. I actually just quit my job, and now I'm working there full time. That's my startup. So any of you do RF or exploitation might want to drop me a line. Again, email. Now I'm gonna move kind of fast too, because I got about 30 slides, and I think I've only got 50 minutes. So and I want everybody to have time for questions. And by the way, let's treat this more like ShmooCon. And if you got something to say, just raise your hand. I'll call you out, and we can keep it kind of a discussion. Shut up. So first, we're going to talk about what it is. We're going to talk about how we talk to 802.15.4. We're also going to discuss Zigbee's relation to that, as well as some other of the protocols that use 802.15.4. We're going to go in depth into the encryption mechanism that it uses. And I'm going to follow that up with exploits and attacks in the MAC layer, which is 802.15.4. And then I was going to demonstrate the hacked home security system by SmartThings. But I discovered when I got here that my hub no longer wishes to talk to the light switch, which is pretty integral to demonstrate to a room full of people that your exploit's working. So maybe some other time, but I do have a video of it working. So you'll have to take me on faith until you can get home and do it yourself, because I'm going to drop some tools for that. Okay, WAT 802.15.4. 802.15.4 is the MAC layer in a sandwich of direct sequence spread spectrum or QPSK PHY layer and the Zigbee networking layer on top of it. So basically, it's just the MAC layer in the standard OSI model. It runs the addressing at a low level right after the PHY layer. And this is important because if you find a exploit in 802.15.4, you've got an exploit in several different protocols that use it, including Zigbee, 6LoWPAN, wireless HART, lightweight mesh. So if you can get in at that kind of under layer, you've got more access, more things that you can do. This is the Zigbee protocol stack, and this is just a good chart that I wanted to throw in here so you guys could get an understanding of what each portion of it does. The Zigbee Alliance is responsible for the application layer down to the PHY, but they implement the 802.15.4 spec, and they have the option to implement portions of it or all of it or whatever. It's freely available for anyone to use, which is why it's so popular with, especially with like the low rate devices. And yeah, that sums up that slide. So what is Zigbee? Will you play? Oh yeah. All right, this isn't going to work. Zigbee is named after bees because of the wiggle that they do to say hi to each other. And there's like a 4-step handshake process when you associate to the network, which is known as the wiggle. So they, for some reason, decided that was cool and named it after bees. Go figure. It is currently found in factories, anything that needs a distributed sensor network, battery-powered mesh networking, and especially in the home automation, home security devices. Basically, anytime you need to route a network around an unmovable object, it's a good choice to use Zigbee, especially if you're in like a remote area or you don't need to push that much data over the line or something like that. So it's found in a lot of different applications. Medical is also one. It's in a lot of different shit, and hacking that's real fucking neato. So, by the way, just like as a quick aside, XB, not all XBs are created equal. Not all XBs do Zigbee. Some XBs, they implement the 802.15.4 layer, but they have their own proprietary protocol on top of them. So if you're looking to get into Zigbee research and not 802.15.4 research, you should be aware of that. Okay, so right now we know what 802.15.4 is, the MAC layer in the sandwich of Zigbee and the radio PHY layer. We know where it can be found: hospitals, home automation, environmental control, all that kind of good stuff. We know who uses it because why it's used. And now we need to know how to interact with it. And this is kind of where I think most people in the community struggle, because like I think everybody in here knew what Zigbee was before they came in. They probably have heard of 802.15.4 before, but you've probably never had to audit a network, or you might not know where to begin. And that's, I think, the most important part of this talk, besides the exploits I'll be dropping, because you need to know how to run the exploits, right? Well, turns out you got a couple of options when you want to just sniff a network. And so far, the best and most expensive option is this thing called a Sewo Open Sniffer. And this is it. It's a pretty small device, runs off of USB power from your computer, plugs into the Ethernet port, and encapsulates Zigbee frames inside of Ethernet frames, and puts that around UDP and sends it to your computer. And so Wireshark picks up on it, says, oh, this looks like Zigbee, but inside of Ethernet, and just displays that to you. And real quick, I'll actually show you an example of this working. Oh, it wants to display up there, apparently. Okay, so in your Open Sniffer, once you plug it in, it assigns itself its own IP address of 10.10.10.2. You just go to it and say, hey, I want to change my radio settings. And you can go into the channel you want, and it does everything. It does Chinese, European, American, and the 2.4 gigahertz ISM bands. So like you can take this around the world and be good. This is the single best option for sniffing Zigbee networks that's out there. It works 100% of the time. It's a good reference implementation of sniffing, and it won't break. And literally all you do is you say run, and it starts shoving packets down the link to Wireshark. And this is a live feed of the network here at the hotel, which is a lightweight mesh. Yes. Yeah, it's only good for 802.15.4. It's got specialized chips in there. Now, you could use GNU radio. Like, that's totally an option. If you would like to spend the 1 month it's going to take you to compile it like I did, then go ahead. There's a guy named Bastian Blosel who created a fork of GNU radio that allows you to use like a USRP1 or whatever other SDR is compatible with GNU radio to sniff using GNU radio. But like I said, it's a total bitch to get working. And, they tend to require a lot more computing power. I think this is a little bit more mobile, and it's actually cheaper than getting all that stuff set up together, especially once you consider the amount of time it takes to get everything ready. Oh, plus the only GNU radio implementation for Zigbee that I know of only does 2.4, and this does all of the different bands. So that's your expensive option. That costs about 250 euros, by the way, which is, I checked last night, it's about roughly $286 American. I don't know what the Canadian is, so don't ask. But your cheap option is this AVR Raven dongle, and I brought one. Not that you can see it, but it's about this big. It's cheap. It's $40. You get it directly from AVR on their web store, or you can go to like Mouse or Electronics or any of those locations. And for $40, you get a 2.4 gigahertz chipset that you can flash with Killer Bee on it. And Killer Bee is the thing that gives us our injection capability. I don't know if you guys like remember in the bad old days where you had to be like, this wireless card I have doesn't have an injection driver. I can't run aircrack on it. I got to go buy another one. Well, this is still kind of in that same maturity level. So you have to get stuff that you can inject packets onto. And in order to do that, you have to flash the firmware using a JTAG flasher onto the AVR Raven. And it has a little tiny JTAG header on it. And they tell you that you need to have a specialized JTAG ICE Mark III in order to flash it on there, and they cost about $300 fucking dollars. And I said, fuck that. And I got one of these. This is a AVR Dragon programmer. It's about $65. So like your bare minimum entry into this, like to flash the card, to get Killer Bee on there and start injecting packets onto a network is $105. I mean, it's not a little bit of money, but it's probably more accessible to everybody in this room than buying a software-defined radio or trying to buy one of the Saywo sniffers. So the steps for that, pretty simple. They have actually got a guide on the Killer Bee framework, which you can go to at GitHub by Riverloop Security or my fork of it. And they tell you just you put some jump cables in there. You just make sure they match. You load the hex file into AVR, dude. You flash it, profit, done. Like the light turns yellow, you're good to go. It takes about 10 minutes, and most of the 10 minutes is making sure you didn't like shove the jump cables in so that they're touching. All right, is everybody tracking me so far? Any questions? All right. So I'm going to step right into encryption, and I like this image because it kind of represents some of what happens in Zigbee. That's a run lock. You're supposed to lock your car door and then put this run lock around it. But I have an RFID enabled system, so what the fuck would that do for me? And Zigbee has some interesting characteristics to it that we'll go over, and you'll laugh too. Raise your hand if any of the following is true. Pineapples are just delicious fruit. Wi-Fi is secure because AES. Encryption does not equal security on Zigbee for a couple of different reasons. Number one, first and foremost, is key distribution. Like this is a problem we've known about since WPA2, right? Like it's really fucking difficult to get your users the key and then rotate the key and make it so it's secure. And then, by the way, when you give the key to somebody, they could give the key to somebody else. Like you have no control over it. That's why they made WPA2 Enterprise, right? And that still has problems, in fact. But in Zigbee, you don't have enterprise. Like you just have whatever like you can touch, basically. So there's no good way for you to load keys and distribute keys and rotate keys in Zigbee. They do have a couple different mechanisms for Zigbee coordinators to become key repositories, but in practice, it doesn't work so great on the residential side. And it doesn't matter anyway, because, we're dealing with battery powered devices that you're putting out in the field, and, maybe they're on the side of a building or something. Someone can come along and just like steal it, dump the flash chip, and then you've got the network key. Like you can join to it now. So it's not really a great barrier for entry when I can just steal the device. Some high assurance devices will have like a glob solder or plastic on there, so you can't like do that as easily. But come on, like, you can just take some acid and get that shit right off. Zigbee also does not always encrypt all layers. It has support for, and I keep saying Zigbee, what I mean is 802.15.4, the MAC layer, has the ability to be AES encrypted, but it is very, very rarely enabled for whatever reason. And it's almost never enabled in Zigbee residential mode. And Zigbee residential mode is consumer devices. So they only encrypt at the Zigbee at the network layer, in fact. So you can fuck with 802.15.4 all day long without any repercussions, without have to worry about any of the security, as long as you're touching a consumer device. Also, beacons aren't encrypted, and I think that's kind of dumb because you can do Metasploit attacks towards it. And if you join a encrypted network, but say that you don't support encryption, and the network allows you to join, it will give you the key in the clear. I don't know why. So, what if it is encrypted when you get there? Oh, and by the way, that last part is like, that's why I have the picture of the run lock, because that's just fucking dumb. So what if it is encrypted? Well, you could spam beacons with matching PAN IDs, and the network will barf. You can spoof beacons of older intermediate PAN IDs and pick up orphans. And so like when the PAN coordinator, which is analogous to the base station in Wi-Fi, when they have to change their network ID, they have to go out to every single device in the currently connected Zigbee network and say, hey, I'm changing. You got to change with me. And if you do it fast enough, like shit will just drop off and start being like, oh, I was here, now what's going on? So you could potentially pick up anything that's been orphaned using spoofed beacons, and you didn't have to deal with any encryption at all throughout this process. And also, you can still see the MAC headers, so you can determine some information about the network. And that sentence is interesting because the Department of Homeland Security commissioned a paper on how to secure Zigbee inside of critical infrastructure. And there's a line inside of the paper that says, oh, if you encrypt at the MAC layer, if you encrypt at 802.15.4, the attacker, they can't see anything. They can't even see who's talking to what. And that's patently fucking false, because this is what encrypted Zigbee looks like, or encrypted 802.15.4 looks like. Only thing that's encrypted is the frame payload for the Mac frame. And like that could be like a Mac command, but look at all the other stuff that's only got a message integrity code applied to it. So you know who's talking to what, and you can actually get a general idea based off the packet size, like what's going on. So, like I said, you can still see who's talking. You can still see the PAN ID, which is important for performing one of my attacks. The only thing you can't see is basically anything other than an acknowledgement frame, which is important because you can still spoof something that's not there by just hacking packets that were directed to it, and beacons. But like I said, you're never going to run into this problem, generally speaking, when you do a pen test on 802.15.4, because Mac encryption is not typically enabled. Vendors don't want that extra step of having to plug in every single device that the user wants to connect to their home automation network. And the Zigbee layer is considered to protect the important shit, right? So like you can see these 802.15.4 command frames coming by, but when they have the Zigbee encryption turned on, you're like, all right, I know it's a light bulb. I know it's sending the turn on command, but I can't send that to it. But you can do other shit. All right. So we got through half of the battle, which is knowing stuff. The other half is red lasers and blue lasers, I'm told. Let's go into some of the attacks, and I'm actually like way ahead of my time. So there's going to be a lot of time for questions. So some of these attacks I have implemented inside of the Killer-B attack suite. I maintain a fork, which is currently like 23 commits ahead of the Killer-B suite. And they're in the process of approving my pull request. So if you go to github.com/Crypt0s/Killer-B, you can go see these attacks that I've implemented before they've been accepted into main, and get a good sense of what's going on. I'm still working on a couple of other things, which I'll talk about at the end. You keep hearing me talk about the command frame, and the command frames, the types are, they're God for you for attacking a Zigbee network. There are 9 total right now. There are some reserve slots. Obviously, 9 is not a big number. You got associations, disassociations, association responses, data requests, PAN ID conflict notifications, orphan notifications, beacon requests, coordinator realignment requests, and guaranteed time slot requests. And let's kind of drill down into these because they're pretty important. Association requests. Abuse, make a shit ton of associations to a device and wait for it to fall off. Like these are not powerful devices. Routers are not powerful. They don't need to be, right? A lot of them just have some dinky, ARM IMX6 device in there. I mean, it's faster than like a MIPS device maybe, but you can still overwhelm those. There's a lot of shit going on in the network too. So you got association response. You could fake join a device, tell it that shit went well and it didn't. So it still thinks it's connected to something when it didn't. It fell off. There's disassociation notify, which is boom, airdrop. So now you can kick shit off. I've actually seen though, interestingly enough, if you remember when I said that you're not obligated to implement the full 802.15.4 spec, a lot of people, they don't implement disassociation notify. I know for a fact that I've never seen a disassociation request come from a SmartThings device. So they probably just don't have that part of the spec enabled, because why would you need to tell something it needs to go away? It's part of your home network. It should never be off the network. There's a data request, which is actually that is required for part of the join process. You could overwork a battery powered device using that. And typically the battery life on a Zigbee device is going to be somewhere around like a couple months, a year, 2 years, something like that. Because Zigbee is really low power, low duty cycle. In fact, you can only transmit 250 kbps over Zigbee. So you can't even do fucking video. You could barely do audio if you wanted. So these devices, they're not powerful, and that's by design, because you don't want to be running out into the field every week to change a AAA battery or some shit like that. So if you constantly pull something for data, it's gonna, you're gonna drain the device. And I've actually had issues where, as I'm doing my attacks, like, oh, this door sensor was supposed to be lasting me with these quadruple A batteries for like a year. Why am I down to 1% after 6 months? You also have PAN ID conflict notifications, which say, hey, I'm on the edge of the network. I'm a node. You're further in geographically speaking. And I detected that there's another network out there that's sharing the same PAN ID number. And a PAN ID on Zigbee is the SSID. It's analogous to the SSID in Wi-Fi. So if there's an SSID conflict in Wi-Fi, that doesn't create as much problems, but on Zigbee it does. So the device will say, hey, I saw a packet, it matched your ID, you should change your network ID. And then the coordinator will go, oh, okay, I'll do that. And then reconfigures the network using those coordinator realignment packets. It says, hey, here's my new channel, here's my new PAN ID. Then there's orphan notifications. Orphan notifications are when a device falls off of a network. It'll say, hey, I haven't heard from my coordinator in a while. I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to broadcast out constantly that I'm falling off the network and I'm looking for a coordinator realignment packet. Please send it to me. Please send it to me. And actually, we can go over to our handy dandy say whoa sniffer. And we can actually see that there's a couple of devices that are on the hotel's network right now that are orphaned. Ooh, come on. Right here, we see that the extended source says it's an asset ablaye lock. That might be interesting for a number of reasons. But if you think about it, man, I hope that doesn't fail closed. But the other problem is, if I did send that a coordinator realignment packet, it'd probably eat it. Like, you'd probably go, oh, okay, sure, I'll take that. And so if I send it that packet, I can tell it to change channel, change PAN IDs, and then someone's got to actually like physically come up to the lock, open it up, reset the lock, rejoin it to the network. Like this is a non-trivial process. If I reconfigured this device, someone would have to touch it. So imagine if you did that to an important sensor out in the network that fell off, that was supposed to be coming back, or you jammed it until it sent out orphan notifications using just like a typical energy jamming. You could do some, maybe not a lot of damage, but you could cause some annoyance by having a technician come out there and have to fix it. There's a lot of locks, by the way, looking for orphans, and I'm just kind of twitching, trying not to do anything. Because one of the tools, we'll get to that. Okay, so then we have a beacon request, and again, it's the same thing as a Wi-Fi beacon. It's got the PAN ID, and what'll happen is you'll see a beacon request come out, and then you'll see a beacon response, and the beacon response will be like, oh, here is my PAN ID number, you should join me. And then that kind of is the impetus to start the association process. So since these aren't encrypted, like this is Metasploit, man, like plain and simple. And I'm actually working on that right now. Last night, instead of going to the party, I was coding that up. So I'm hoping to have that maybe released by the end of next week. We'll see. Question mark. So that could be useful for any number of reasons because, like I said, if you sent it the realignment command, it got it to your network, or if like somebody's trying to set up a network and you made it join your network, man, that'd be really fucking annoying. I can't get this shit to work because it's just joining my network before it ever joins yours. And since my code's purpose driven to just respond as fast as possible, like your coordinator doesn't get a chance. All right, so we also have those coordinator realignment frames I was talking about. They allow you to change the channel or the PAN ID of a target device. Generally speaking, you need to send these out when the device is in a state to receive it. So that you can't just go, I'm going to configure all of you motherfuckers. But at least in my experience, that hasn't worked. They do have a Zigbee way of doing this at layer 3, so it depends on whether or not your network that you're attacking supports the 802.15.4 mechanism of doing the realignment, or maybe they have something going on in the Zigbee layer. I know not enough about that specific packet. I think that's definitely a direction further research should be performed in, and I think there's definitely some gold in them there hills. And then finally, there's a guaranteed time slot request. And this is important because Zigbee beacon-enabled networks, they have a beacon that goes out whether or not someone requests one that has certain information in it called guaranteed time slot. And the guaranteed time slot allocates a portion of the network, which is normally carrier sends multiple access collision avoidance, and turns it into like, you talk at this time. So if you fill all those slots, by the way, they're first come, first serve. If you fill all the slots, any of the things that are supposed to be like speaking at correct timed intervals won't get the chance to because the slots are filled. So they're fucked. So I don't have a tool for guaranteed time slot requests yet because I don't really see too many devices using it. But that's because I haven't taken a look at any critical infrastructure things yet. Okay, so again, this is what a Zigbee association flood looks like. An attacker inundates the target coordinator with a mini clients. The target crashes or loses legitimate clients. As a bonus, you could respond to all the packets directed to fake addresses with ACK to force the coordinator to hold fake clients. So if they try to drop things and by checking to see if they've ACKed packets recently, then you could continue to fool it. There is disassociation, which is airdrop. Again, this is kind of hit or miss in my experience, but the tool exists. Key recovery attack using a network device that does not support encryption, joining it to an encrypted network, which is allowing a unencrypted device to join to it, will get you the password. PAN ID conflict attack, and we kind of brushed up against this one earlier. If you send a PAN ID conflict notification, the coordinator must realign the network and has to touch every single device. If you do that very fast and you're dealing with very slow devices, some of them will stop working. And that's what I'm going to show you a little bit later. You can also just do a forced PAN ID conflict attack where you just make beacons that match the PAN ID of the coordinator. And now you don't have to tell the coordinator that you detected a PAN ID conflict. You can just say there is a PAN ID conflict. You must change now, and it will work perfectly. This causes Zigbee networks to flip the fuck out, especially SmartThings. SmartThings devices, what'll happen is the network will degrade, the devices will fall off, the coordinator will continue to work. Because the coordinator is still on the internet, still responding to commands, the app on the SmartThings device, your phone, will not tell you that anything is wrong. Meanwhile, I'm walking in through your front door because the motion sensor is broken, you don't have any door detection, and none of your lights are turning on, your alarms aren't working, and then I shut the door when I'm done robbing you, and then your device, I'd stop doing the attack, your network heals itself, the devices issue beacon requests, they do go through the association process again, they join back, nothing happens. So literally, I run the attack, steal all your shit, stop running the attack, nothing happens. You just come home to an empty house. There's also a false orphan attack where you can say, hey, this device dropped off the network. I'm looking for a realignment frame in an attempt to confuse the coordinator. I haven't seen this actually work yet, but again, I've only tested a couple of different manufacturers. I figured I'd put the tool out there just to see if maybe we get a win somehow. And there's also malicious acknowledgements, which is an area of research that's particularly interesting in TCP, where you can kind of just sort of limp a connection along. Well, you can do the same thing here. You can limp the connection along even if the device isn't there anymore, and make it so that things seem okay. Stuff will start breaking, but it won't have technically disassociated from the network. And there's also this pretty interesting attack using the crypto. So for crypto-enabled networks, you can send junk frames with incrementing counters, which will cause the device to process the MIC code, the message integrity code, and then drop the frame. Well, when you're talking about a battery-powered device, even if you have a specialized AES extensions on whatever microprocessor you've got in that little thing, you're still burning a lot of battery power to get that mic checked. So if you're just constantly sending it bad packets that it's got to validate, like it's going to heat up and drop off when it runs out of battery power. And there's been some academic papers that suggest that you can run a battery powered device that is supposed to last 1 year down to 24 hours by using this attack. So here's where I would give a demonstration if I had a working in-person one. However, I apparently performed my sacrifice incorrectly and did not hail the glow cloud appropriately, and the hooded figures have denied my pass. So I will instead attempt to use the video that I have prepared. Shut up. Please load. Okay, so this is the SmartThings hub opened up. There's actually a shit ton of headers on there for stuff I just haven't gotten around to looking at. This is a motion detector for Smart Hub, for SmartThings rather. And this is the wall plug that they use. And these are 2 Killer Bee dongles, which are about to run the software I created. It works. And then it'll turn off. Eventually. There we go. Okay, so it works. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run the attack, which is going to spam fake beacons towards the SmartThings device at a very high rate. You can see there on the left with the Wireshark capture, it's just a shit ton of beacons. And now I'm going to flip over the device again after about a minute of doing the attack, and it won't work anymore. No worky. And I didn't get any notifications on my phone, although I guess I did a shit job of showing that. But they all say a malformed packet because I had a bug, which I've since fixed. But there you go. Now you can rob people. Don't do that. Don't do that. So that's a good question. 900 megahertz obviously goes a little bit further than 2.4, but because of the low, the low signal rate, the low QAM, you can go a little bit further with Zigbee without getting so much data error. So it covers basically a house, a block, depending on a lot of different factors. But I'm also not an RF engineer, so. But it also depends on your broadcast power. So if you want to just amp that shit up, I mean, you can go far, man. Additional questions, please. We've got plenty of time. Yes. So the question was, do you have coordination issues with multiple Zigbee networks being set up at the same time? Yes. So if you're trying to discover a device at the same time as someone else and you're trying to connect a device, you may have an issue where it joins to a different coordinator than maybe the one you intended. That is more of an issue, I think, with the consumer level devices where they're supposed to be used in your home. So the chances of you running into a hostile environment and B, another coordinator searching at the exact same time within broadcast distance is pretty low. Inside of the critical infrastructure world, SCADA, stuff like that, you're going to actually configure each device separately from the get-go to use this coordinator, this network address, this encryption key. So yes for consumer devices, no for more of the specialized stuff. To my knowledge, I've never even thought about that question, and so it's a really good question. I don't know. I would imagine that because of the mesh networking characteristics of Zigbee, you could get that to heal pretty quickly just by using multiple coordinators and multiple Zigbee devices able to route messages for other people. But that's at that point, we're talking more of a Zigbee mesh network and less of an 802.15.4 issue. So I think that is solved, but at higher layers. And I wouldn't know how you would do it just with 802.15.4. So I actually am. That's a good question. I'm going to look into that. One more time. What protocol should you use instead? Well, don't use Bluetooth Low Energy. It's even worse. Don't use Z-Wave. It's proprietary. I would say use Zigbee, or excuse me, use 802.15.4, but encrypt at the MAC layer. Because like when I first was reading this spec, I was like, hey, this is actually pretty secure. Like there are problems with it, but they're not insurmountable. And as long as you are encrypting at the MAC layer, you're kind of glossing over a lot of the other issues you might have. So I would say use Zigbee, encrypt at the MAC layer. Further questions? So you can use ZB Ward Drive from the Killer0s suite to just go around and use one of the dongles or even the SAWO sniffer to just look for Zigbee networks. As far as what you would do with that information, Praetorian actually strapped one of the dongles onto the bottom of a drone, flew it around a city for a while, just to sort of catalog all the different Zigbee devices. They found a lot of televisions. I don't know why Sony decided that was a good idea, but nonetheless, that is what happens. So you could go around and just fuck with shit. I mean, I imagine if you do that towards a nuclear power plant, though, you might run into some issues. Actually, that reminds me, I should probably not tell you my password, but show you some of the stuff that's in the Killer0s suite. Oh, good, that's up. Not that, you're going to be able to read any of it, Jesus. I can't. I know. Well, here, we'll easy mode this shit. Oh, no, I don't have internet, so never mind. So it's really fucking hard to read, but inside of Killer0s, we have the ZB Ward Drive, ZB Stumbler, ZB Wireshark, and ZB Find, all utilities which you can use to do fox hunting and the like. I especially recommend just using ZB Wireshark or ZB Find. The ZB Find inside of the Killer0s suite does not work unless you're using my fork, in which case I have bug fixed it. But There are also utilities for doing, let's see here, orphan notifications, conflict floods, realignment spoofing. There's, let's see here, fake beacons, association floods, disassociation floods, and just doing sniffing. And the Killer Bee suite also has some pretty good tools for pulling out network keys from any sniffed traffic as well. Further questions? Nope. You're boned. Yes. They typically will just have chips that process the 900 megahertz signal, or chips that do the 2.4 gigahertz signal. Some of them have multiple radios. I know the Wink Hub. By the way, the Wink Hub, super awesome utility for getting started into Zigbee hacking, because it is very easily rooted and has some utilities on there that you can use to directly interface with Zigbee, Lutron, KID, and Bluetooth. So that specific device has many radios. I think a total of 6. So including Z-Wave. No, and here's why. Generally speaking, unless you're hacking a coordinator and you manage to pop it, which, by the way, most of my attacks are just DOSes. Generally, it's enough. But if you did manage to pop the device, if it was a coordinator, you could get a shell from Linux, because they generally run Linux, right? But if you popped a reduced function device, just like some battery powered node out there, you will be on basically a PIC or an AVR or something like that. So you're not going to have a whole ton of processing power. It's basically an Arduino. Oh yeah, well, I mean, your coordinator at some point has to come back and bridge into Ethernet so that you can talk to it using your browser or something, right? So yeah, there's definitely a way for you to pivot in through a Zigbee network into a like Ethernet LAN. 100% correct. A lot of times this stuff will be inside of your building, but as environmental control, door control, that kind of stuff. I've seen entire hotels where everything is Zigbee enabled, from the freaking thermostat to the damn lock in the door. And I've even seen that software run on the point of sale system. Fun fact. Any additional questions? Oh God, why? Okay, well then I think I can end a little bit early. So there we go.